Mother never once asked me what happened. She didn't pause. She didn't hesitate. She just turned around, pointed at the front door, and said, "Get out of my house." I was 17 years old. The night it happened, it was the kind of cold that doesn't just chill you. It gets into your bones and stays there. February in Michigan doesn't play around. The kind of cold where your fingers stop hurting after a while because they've gone past the point of feeling anything at all. I stood on the front porch with no coat. I hadn't grabbed it fast enough. My mother had moved so quickly the door was already closing behind me before I even understood what was happening. Through the front window, I could see the living room light. I could see the TV flickering. And I could see my brother sitting on the couch with a bowl of popcorn, watching me stand in the freezing dark like I was the most entertaining thing he'd seen all week. He was smiling. That's the image that has stayed with me for 8 years. Not my mother's face, not the cold, my brother's smile. His name is Brendan. He's 2 years older than me. And for as long as I can remember, he could do no wrong. I want to be fair. I spent a lot of time trying to be fair about this, going back and examining my own memories with as much honesty as I can manage. And the truth is, Brendan wasn't always cruel. When we were very small, before I was old enough to be competition for anything, he was actually kind to me. He'd share his Halloween candy. He taught me how to ride my bike. There's a photo somewhere of us at a 4th of July barbecue, his arm around my shoulder, both of us laughing at something off camera. I don't know exactly when it changed. Somewhere around the time I started getting better grades than him, I think. Or maybe when our father left and my mother needed someone to orbit. And Brendan was there, and he was easy to love in a way that I apparently wasn't. My father left when I was 11. He didn't leave dramatically. There was no screaming fight, no throwing things. He just slowly became more absent, then physically absent, then entirely absent. He moved to Portland. He sent birthday cards for 2 years, then stopped. By the time I was 17, I hadn't spoken to him in 4 years. So it was just the three of us. My mother, Brendan, and me. My mother is, I don't like the word toxic. It feels too clinical and too easy. But I don't have a better one. She loved Brendan with this fierce, consuming love that left very little oxygen in the room for anyone else. When Brendan failed his driver's test twice, she told him the examiner had been unfair. When Brendan got caught cheating on a history exam junior year, she went to the school and argued until the teacher agreed to let him retake it. When Brendan wanted a car for graduation, she put herself into credit card debt to buy him one. When I got a full academic scholarship to a state university, she said, "Well, let's hope you can keep up with the coursework." That was her version of congratulations. I learned early not to expect anything different. I learned to keep my head down, keep my grades up, and stay out of the way. I had friends at school. I had life outside those walls. I was okay. Or I told myself I was okay, which is a different thing, but it's what you do when you're 17 and you don't have a lot of options. What I didn't have was any idea of how bad things were about to get. The lie started about 2 weeks before that February night. Brendan had borrowed money from my mother, again. A significant amount this time, close to $2,000, money she'd been putting aside for a home repair. He told her it was to cover a security deposit on an apartment he was supposedly renting with some friends. He was 20 at the time, still living at home, still spending most of his days doing very little. She gave him the money, without hesitation. The apartment never materialized. The money disappeared. And when my mother noticed it was gone and started asking questions, Brendan needed someone to blame. He told her I'd taken it. Specifically, he told her that he'd seen me going through her bedroom drawer, which is where she kept an envelope of emergency cash, and that I'd been stealing from her for months. He said I'd confessed to him privately, and that I'd been using the money to go out with friends she didn't approve of. He made it specific enough to sound credible. He even said I'd threatened to deny it if he told her. My mother believed him instantly. She didn't come to me and ask. She didn't sit me down. She called me into the kitchen that evening, and before I could even register her expression, she told me she knew what I'd done. That she was disgusted with me, that I was a liar and a thief, and that she was ashamed to call me her daughter. I stood there trying to understand what I was hearing. It was like someone had handed me a script for a play I'd never rehearsed. "What are you talking about?" I said. "I haven't taken anything." Brendan told me everything. Brendan is lying. She looked at me then the way you look at someone who has deeply disappointed you, and also confirmed your worst suspicions about them, like I had just proven her right about something she'd always half believed. Of course you'd say that, she said. That was the end of the conversation. For the next 2 weeks, the house was a cold war. My mother stopped speaking to me except when necessary. Brendan acted like nothing had happened, which was somehow worse. He'd come downstairs in the mornings and pour himself coffee and ask me to pass the cereal like we were fine, like he hadn't just dismantled my relationship with our mother using nothing but words. I tried to defend myself twice more. Both times my mother shut it down immediately. She didn't want to hear it. She'd made up her mind, and in her mind, I was the villain. I started keeping records. I didn't know exactly why at the time. Some instinct, I think, or some desperate attempt to feel like I had any control over what was happening. I noted dates and times in a journal. I saved text messages. And one evening, about 10 days after the accusation, I used my phone to take a short video through the kitchen doorway. Just a few seconds of Brendan handing my mother a folded piece of paper and the two of them laughing. I didn't know then what the paper was. I found out later it was a printed screenshot of a fake conversation Brendan had fabricated. A fake text exchange between himself and me in which I admitted to taking the money. A fake conversation he had created on a website that generates fake text screenshots. I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew was that something was wrong, and I was scared, and the temperature in the house had been below freezing for days, before it literally became that outside. The night she kicked me out, it started over dinner. I had made dinner. I often made dinner. It was one of the ways I tried to be useful, tried to stay in her good graces. Pasta, garlic bread, a salad, a normal meal. I put it on the table and called them both and sat down. And for about 4 minutes, we ate in silence, and I let myself believe it might just be a normal evening. Then my mother said, I spoke to Mrs. Abernethy today. Mrs. Abernethy lived 2 houses down. Her son was a year behind me in school. I had no idea what this had to do with anything. She said she saw your car parked outside the mall 3 Saturdays ago at 9 at night. I had been at the mall with my best friend. We'd seen a movie and gone to get food after. This was not a secret. I hadn't been told I needed to report my whereabouts on the Saturday night. Okay, I said. You told me you were studying at the library. I went back through my memory. I hadn't told her anything that Saturday. I'd mentioned it to Brendan. I remembered that. I'd said something like, I'm going to the mall with Lena, back by 10 on my way out the door. I said that to Brendan, not to her. I didn't tell you I was at the library, I said. I didn't tell you anything. I told Brendan where I was going. My mother's face changed. So now you're calling me a liar. I'm telling you what happened. You told me you were at the library. Brendan heard you. Then Brendan heard you. Then Brendan heard wrong. What came next happened fast. My mother stood up. She said things I'm not going to repeat in full because some of it was genuinely ugly. The kind of things that, once said, you can't take back and you don't really try to. She brought up the money again. She brought up how ungrateful I was, how selfish, how I had always made everything harder. She said she was tired of it. She said she was done. And then she pointed at the door. I tried to speak. I tried to say something, anything, but she was already walking toward me, and I backed up, and then I was in the hallway with my shoes on, but no coat, and the door closed behind me. I heard the lock turn. I stood on the porch for a moment that felt very long. The wind was vicious. I had my phone in my pocket. I pulled it out and called my best friend Lena, but it went to voicemail. I called the only other person I could think of. My father. We hadn't spoken in 4 years. I had his number still. I don't know why I'd kept it. I pressed call and stood there in the dark with the cold working its way through my shirt, and I genuinely did not expect him to pick up. He picked up on the second ring. My father is not a perfect man. I want to be honest about that because the story isn't about him being a hero. It's about what happened, and what happened involved a lot of human messiness and complication. But he picked up the phone. And when I told him I was standing outside the house in February with no coat, he didn't ask for context. He said, "Give me your address. I'm coming." He was in Indianapolis at the time, which was about 4 hours away. He said he'd drive through the night. I went to Lena's house. She lived close enough that I could walk it, and when her mother opened the door and saw my face, she pulled me inside without asking a single question and made me sit in front of their fireplace with a blanket and a mug of something hot, and I cried for the first time since any of this had started. When my father arrived early the next morning, he looked older than I remembered. There were lines around his eyes I didn't recognize. He sat across from me at Lena's kitchen table, and I told him everything, all of it from the beginning. He listened the whole time. He didn't interrupt, didn't defend anyone, didn't try to find the version where nobody was really at fault. He just listened. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Do you still have that journal?" I did. He asked to see my phone. I handed it over. He went through everything. The notes, the timestamps, the short video I'd taken through the kitchen doorway. He asked me to explain every piece of it. Then he said, "I think there's something else going on, and I need to find out what it is." He called my mother that same morning. I wasn't in the room for that call, but I could hear pieces of it through the door. Her voice was loud. His was not. He asked to come over and talk. She said there was nothing to talk about. He said he thought they needed to look at some things together. She said she knew everything she needed to know. He said very quietly, "I don't think you do." She hung up on him. He sat there for a minute. Then he got out his laptop. He had actually retained a lawyer a few years back to handle some financial paperwork related to a settlement from a minor car accident, and that lawyer had given him a card and told him to call if he ever needed anything. My father was the kind of person who kept business cards in a folder. He found the card, called the number, and left a message explaining the situation, specifically the part about the fabricated text message screenshot. Then he drove to our house. I wasn't with him. He asked me to stay at Lena's. I didn't want to, but I understood why he was asking. He rang the doorbell. My mother, to her credit, opened the door. Or maybe she was just caught off guard by him actually showing up in person. Either way, she let him in. What happened inside that house, I know partly from what my father told me later and partly from what I eventually saw on his phone, because he had recorded the conversation. He told me later he'd done it on instinct, for protection, without being entirely sure he'd ever use it. In most states, one-party consent recording is legal. He'd looked it up in the parking lot before he rang the bell. He sat down at the kitchen table. Brendan was home. He asked them both to sit down. He said he wanted to understand what had happened to the $2,000. My mother started to say it was none of his business, which it was and it wasn't. Complicated history, old accounts. But my father just waited until she finished and then said calmly, "Brendan, where did the money go?" Brendan shrugged. He said he'd told her. He said I'd taken it. My father said, "Can you prove that?" Brendan pulled out his phone. He said he had the texts. He turned the phone toward my father. My father leaned forward to look at it, and then he did something Brendan didn't expect. He took a photo of the screen. Brendan pulled the phone back, but the photo was taken. My father said, "I'd like to understand this better. Do you mind if I pull this up on something bigger?" He nodded toward the laptop he brought with him. What happened next is something I've turned over in my mind so many times since. My father opened his laptop and navigated to a website he'd found that morning, a website that archives and identifies fake text message generators. It took him about 45 seconds to match the formatting, the font, the exact template Brendan had used to the screenshot on his phone. They were identical. My father put the two images side by side on his screen and turned it around to face my mother. She didn't say anything for a long time. Brendan tried to recover. He said the website must have copied his real texts. He said it was a coincidence. He said the formatting was common. He said, and this is the part that still makes my chest tight when I think about it. He said I had probably done it, that I had probably made a fake screenshot to cover my tracks. My mother looked at him. Then she looked at the screen. Then she looked at him again. Something shifted in her face. It wasn't the sudden dramatic transformation you might hope for. It wasn't like a switch flipping. It was slower and more painful than that. Like watching someone realize they've been standing in the wrong room the whole time and they're not entirely sure how they got there. She asked Brendan where the money actually went. He said he didn't know what she was talking about. She asked him again. He left the room. He went upstairs and closed his bedroom door, and he didn't come back down. My father stayed for another hour. He spoke to my mother quietly, not angrily. He told her what I told him. He showed her the video from my phone, the one through the kitchen doorway, the folded piece of paper, the two of them laughing. She watched it without speaking. At some point, she started to cry. I don't say that to be dramatic about it. I say it because it happened, and because, watching it, my father told me about it later, carefully, was complicated. She wasn't crying the way people cry when they're caught. She was crying the way people cry when they realize they've done something they can't undo, and they're not ready to admit how bad it is. My father picked me up from Lena's house that evening. He took me to a diner, and we sat in a booth by the window, and he ordered pancakes and I ordered waffles, and we talked for almost 3 hours. He told me what had happened at the house. He told me he was sorry for leaving, for the years of silence, for not being there. He didn't dress it up. He said he had made choices that had real consequences and that he had spent a long time not thinking hard enough about what those consequences were. He asked me what I needed. I told him I needed to not go back to that house. He said, okay. I moved in with my father in Indianapolis that March. I finished my senior year at a new school, which was hard in its own ways, but I graduated with my scholarship intact. I went to university in the fall. My mother and I didn't speak for almost a year. The part about Brendan and the money has a specific ending that I still find almost too specific to believe, but I verified it twice, and it's real. My father's lawyer sent a letter to my mother regarding the fabricated screenshot, not threatening legal action, but making clear that document fabrication and using it to make false accusations had real legal implications. The letter referenced the computer fraud statutes and the forgery statutes and was very precise about what Brendan had done and what my mother had participated in by not correcting it. My mother confronted Brendan again, this time with the letter in her hand. He admitted it. He told her he panicked about the money and hadn't known what else to do. He said it just sort of happened. He said he hadn't expected it to go as far as it did. My mother made him pay back every cent of the $2,000. He had to take a second job to do it. It took him 8 months. She told me all of this the first time we spoke again, over the phone, in a conversation that was stilted and difficult and ended before either of us was really ready. She apologized. It wasn't a complete apology. There were qualifications in it. Things she said about how she hadn't known, how she couldn't have known, how Brendan had been so convincing. I let those parts go. Not because I thought they were fair, but because I'd already decided I didn't want to spend my 20s trying to relitigate my childhood from a booth in my own head. She and I are careful with each other now. We talk every few weeks. There are subjects we don't touch. It's not the relationship I might have wanted, but it's something, and it's honestly more than I expected. My brother and I haven't spoken since the night my father came to the house. He's never reached out, and I've never reached out. I don't know if that will change. I think about it sometimes. My father and I talk every Sunday. We've taken 2 road trips together. Once to the Smoky Mountains, once up to Vermont for a fall weekend. He met someone a couple of years ago, a woman named, I was going to say her name, but she's private, and it's her story to tell, not mine. What I'll say is, she's kind, and she makes him laugh, and the first time I had dinner with him, I cried a little bit in her bathroom, because he seemed genuinely happy, and I'd almost stopped expecting to see that. I'm 25 now. I finished my degree. I work in healthcare administration, which is not glamorous, but it's meaningful, and I'm good at it. I have my own apartment. I have a cat named something embarrassing that I tell people is ironic. I have Lena, who was in my life at 17 and is still in my life now, which is its own kind of miracle when you think about how many people you lose between then and now. I think about that February night more than I probably should. The cold. The window. My brother's face. But what I think about more is the moment my father picked up the phone. I have heard people say that the people who are supposed to love you always show up when it matters. I've heard that, and I've wanted to believe it, and I've also lived a life that gave me complicated evidence either way. What I know is this. Sometimes they show up late. Sometimes they show up with 8 years of things they should have said piled in their car along with their overnight bag. Sometimes showing up at all is the thing that matters most, not the timing or the reasons or the inadequacy of everything that came before it. He picked up the phone. He drove through the night. He sat down at the kitchen table. And he didn't yell, and he didn't accuse. And he just put 2 images side by side on a screen and let the truth speak for itself. That's the part I hold on to. Not the cold, not the lie, not my brother's smile through the window. I hold on to the quiet man at the kitchen table with the laptop screen turned outward, waiting for my mother to look. Because she did look. She looked for a long time. And that was where it started to change. I've thought a lot about what actually causes things like this to happen. Not in a vague, abstract way, I mean specifically, mechanically. What series of choices, made by real people on real days, leads to a 17-year-old standing outside in February with no coat while her brother eats popcorn on the couch? The answer, as best as I can figure it, is this. When people are never held accountable for small things, they lose the ability to stop themselves before the big ones. Brendan didn't wake up one morning and decide to destroy my relationship with our mother. He got there gradually, through 100 smaller moments where the consequences never came. Every time he was protected from the outcome of his own choices, he learned that someone else would absorb the cost. For years, that someone was my mother. That night in February, it was me. That's not a judgment, it's just what I've observed. Actions have weight. They move through time. And eventually, the weight lands somewhere. What I didn't expect, what genuinely surprised me, was that the truth would have its own momentum too. I hadn't counted on my father picking up the phone. I hadn't counted on him driving through the night, or knowing about text screenshot generators, or having the instinct to photograph Brendan's screen before the phone got pulled away. None of that was part of any plan I made. I was just a scared kid standing in the cold, and the truth was already moving on its own. Faster than the lie that had tried to outrun it. I think about the kind of person my father became in that kitchen. Quiet, methodical, not angry. He didn't go in there looking for a fight. He went in looking for clarity, and there's something in that I've tried to carry with me since. That the most effective response to dishonesty is rarely volume. It's precision. It's showing up with the right information and letting it speak. I also think about Lena's mother. Opening the door without a word and putting me in front of a fire. Nobody asked her to do that. It cost her nothing and it meant everything. I think about what it does to a person, what it did to me, to experience that kind of simple, uncomplicated decency at the exact moment you stopped expecting it. It recalibrates something. It reminds you what people are capable of when they're just quietly choosing to be good. And I think about myself at 17. Keeping a journal nobody asked me to keep, saving texts, filming a few seconds of a conversation through a doorway on instinct. I didn't know why I was doing it at the time. I think I know now. Somewhere underneath the fear and the confusion, there was a part of me that believed the truth was worth preserving, that it mattered, that eventually someone would want to see it. That instinct to document, to stay clear-headed, to not abandon your own account of reality even when everyone around you is insisting on a different one. That's not something anyone taught me. It grew out of necessity, but I think it's one of the better things that period of my life produced in me. It made me careful. It made me someone who pays attention, who keeps records, who doesn't let important things disappear quietly. I'm 25 now and my life is genuinely fine. Better than fine, most days. But I didn't get here by waiting for someone to come fix it. I got here by making one careful decision at a time in a season when everything felt unstable, calling the right person, telling the whole truth, staying at Lena's instead of going back to a house that had already made its position clear. The cold that night was real. So was the window and the light and my brother's face, but so was the phone ringing twice before someone picked up. That's what I hold on to.